Now there are many protesting. Many want the president to resign. But then there are also those who say that they want a system change. Now, what is a system change?
Then when you hear about the corruption in this country, you called about a change of system right at the beginning. Corruption is one thing that has to go. That's a part of the change of the system that we need. We can't take that money which needs to go into education and education of the poor and then put it into fancy government projects, state-owned enterprises. We can't do that. You take Sri Lankan Airlines, for example. I'm all for having an airline if it can be run profitably, if the state doesn't have to put taxpayers' money, right? Because it's a question of priorities. Do we educate our children? Do we educate the children of the less fortunate? Or do we run some of these state-owned enterprises? There are hundreds and hundreds of state-owned enterprises. In COPE, we are looking at it now. And we are looking at this in a joint government and opposition forum and saying, let's make collective decisions for the betterment of the country. And therefore, we need to reform our state-owned enterprises.
The situation in Sri Lanka is dire. Sri Lankans have never faced such a crisis. There is political instability and many have lost faith in the system, and many want a complete system change. Today, joining me in conversations with Alanki is the former State Minister of Finance, Member of Parliament, Eran Wickremeratne. Welcome.
Thank you.
And thank you. I know you were busy today, but yet you made the time to be a part of this conversation. Mr. Wickremeratne, as I begin this conversation, I'd like to focus on the economic crisis. Was this solely the responsibility of the current government, or was this due to mismanagement caused by successive governments?
There are two things. The present crisis is a direct result of wrong policies and poor management by the current government. Sri Lanka has some structural economic problems over a period of time, one of which is it has had a budget deficit for a long time.
Right.
So, and that's not a good thing. It needs to be brought down. And it's really only in the period 2015 to 19, after 1954, 1955 and 1979, apart from those 3 years, that actually we had a positive balance. Was when that is incomes were more than expenditures before financial costs. It's called a primary balance. We had it only in 2017 and 18. So you can see there's a structural problem, but we managed the economy well during our period in 2015 to 19. The next problem it has had is an imbalance in the trading account. If you put it another way, we are always importing more than we are exporting.
Right.
So that it creates a foreign currency or a dollar shortage. And that has also been there for a considerable period of time. We have tried to bridge that by tourism, by remittances of Sri Lankans working overseas, and we have gone like that. But all governments have somehow or other managed those two deficits without leading to a crisis like this. This government is directly responsible for the present crisis, poor management and wrong policy.
Right. Now there are many protesting. Many want the president to resign. But then there are also those who say that they want a system change. Now, what is a system change and how can it be achieved?
Yeah, so when people talk of a system change, we need to ask ourselves the question, what do people actually mean? So it can be a change in the way we are governed. It can be a change in how decisions are being made, how people are included and excluded. It can be about culture. It can be about values and political culture and so forth. So when you say system change, it's quite a wide concept, right? So certainly everybody is agreed that what we have is unacceptable.
Right.
The question is, how do we change it and what do we actually want changed? So I think that what is happening on the streets, right, and in the golf face and in other places is clearly an expression of the frustration of what we have, and they want to change. Now, for those of us in Parliament, right, how do we actually be sensitive to what people are saying, and within the democratic process and within the rule of law, make the changes that will be for the better of everybody living in this country. Because the alternative is chaos, and the alternative can be frightening. So we have to do it within the rule of law and within the democratic process. So where do we start? In Parliament, where we need to start is by looking at actually the way we have been governed. If you look at the world, there's presidential systems and there are parliamentary systems. There have been good presidential systems and bad presidential systems. There have been good parliaments and bad parliaments. So the question is, both systems work. But in Sri Lanka, with the experience of the last 35 years, people have come to the conclusion that our presidential system does not really work for the betterment of people. So there is an outcry that we must do something about it. So we, right, as a political party, the SJB, have basically brought an amendment to Parliament, which we have just presented, and that amendment says, scrap the executive presidency, or in other words, clip the powers of the executive presidency, make president really responsible to Parliament. Now, there's a reason for it. In the last presidential election, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, as a candidate, got an overwhelming vote. Overwhelming vote. Now, most of the people protesting out there, also people have voted for him. But they chose him. So he's got an overwhelming vote. But it's understandable, because in 2 years, they have decided that, my heavens, what a mistake we have made, which is also good. Then, what did he do after that vote? Parliament, he got an overwhelming majority in Parliament, a 2/3 majority. In addition to that, what does he go and do? He brings a change to the Constitution, right? And basically does away with the 19th Amendment, which had the checks and balances on the executive president and on executive power. He did away with that. And he brought in a 20th Amendment. Now, it was Ali Sabri, right, the lawyer who actually did it, brought the 20th Amendment. Everybody in this country is saying that that is an absolute failure, the 20th Amendment. So we have to correct that situation. So the cry now is, right, we hear go Gota, kind of go home Gota cry. But if I turn that into parliamentary language, we really need to get rid of the present executive presidency. That's a starting point in Parliament. Then there are lots of other things that need to be done subsequently.
Yeah, one such proposal of the SJB for the 21st Amendment to the Constitution aims to prevent corrupt crossovers. Now, this is very interesting because you see people crossing over for personal benefits or gains. How can this be achieved?
Yeah, so the amendment that we have brought into Parliament, and Alanki, you're right, you raised a very important thing on crossovers. But if I were to very briefly say it, you have a president who is elected by Parliament. He is the head of state and he is the head of the armed forces of the country, right? And you have a Parliament, you have a Prime Minister who has a majority confidence of the House of Parliament. He picks his cabinet, he recommends his cabinet to the President, and the President appoints the cabinet. And they are responsible for the duties of the executive and government. In that amendment, we have also limited the number of cabinet ministers to 25. And all other ministers, state ministers, deputy ministers, all to another 25.
Right.
So they can't do it by looking at faces and rewarding their friends and things like that. Then the question you raised is that, I get elected through a political party, then for reasons of conscience, much less, but more for reasons of personal gain, I go and join the government. I can cross over. What do I cross over for? I cross over for a ministerial position. Now, in this amendment, we have said if anybody crosses over, they cannot be given a ministerial position. So we have basically tried to, the rewards of crossing over, personal rewards of crossing over, we have not allowed it in this amendment. We have also done something else. People who cross over know how our judicial system works. And if they cross over, even if they're expelled from their party, to get them expelled from Parliament, they know it will take 2 or 3 years, and by that time the term is over. So in this amendment, we have also made another proposal. That is, the political party holds an inquiry, and if they decide to basically expel the member has to go to the Supreme Court directly. The Supreme Court can't hide behind procedural issues. The Supreme Court within a month needs to give a judgment whether the expulsion according to the law, right, was correct or not correct. And that determines it. So it's only a 1 month period. And therefore, we have been able to limit people crossing over for personal reasons. So this amendment has many other important features and certainly will augment good governance.
I really do hope so, because I think people are losing faith in politicians because they do cross over from side to side. And they've been elected because people see them representing a certain political party, and then they get voted in, but then they cross over simply for their personal gain. So I really do hope this gets implemented. And going forward, Sri Lanka needs effective and meaningful reforms to deal with the current crisis. What can you suggest that would help Sri Lanka in the long run?
So I think there are many things. There are short-term things that need to be done, and there are long-term things that need to be done. Shall I start with the short-term ones?
Sure.
Okay. People are under pressure, right? They don't have electricity, long power cuts, never heard of previously in this country. 7 hours, 10-hour power cuts, right? They don't have cooking gas in their kitchens, and the mothers and sisters mainly, I mean, some men are also in the kitchen, but mainly, they are under tremendous pressure, right? Because they don't have that. Then they don't have petrol or diesel. They don't have sometimes basic foods, like milk powder, or they don't have the necessary pharmaceutical drugs, and people are under tremendous pressure. So our first priority should be is to get people off the streets, off the roads, back into their homes, back into their workplaces. We need to get our students, back to school, and studying, educating themselves, advancing themselves. We need to get our factories working without interruptions of electricity and power. We need to increase manufacturing. We need to get our exports really booming. The whole economy has been affected. Apart from family life, the whole economy is affected. So some of the immediate steps we need to take. One is the talks with the IMF, right? We have to succeed at it. So the IMF gives an extended fund facility. They take several months to determine that, right? We should go for that. It will probably be a 3-year facility. Then, because we're in a crisis, we need a rapid financing facility.
Right.
And so far, the news coming from Washington doesn't sound very encouraging, despite even helps from friendly countries like India encouraging the IMF to provide this for us. But so far, there seems to be a problem. Friendly countries are also having a problem presently. They are not willing to give us bridging finance. And partially the reason for that is they have lost trust in this government and the fact that they feel that there's no political stability. So apart from getting the IMF brings credibility if you have a program with them. I have my personal experience because I was the former State Minister of Finance. I worked with Mangala Samaravira, the Minister of Finance, in the last period. And we had an IMF program. So they said fiscal consolidation, that is reducing the budget deficit. We actually went in that direction. We were able to increase the taxpayers in this country, right, by about 600,000 taxpayers from 11 lakhs to 17 lakhs. And we made a lot of progress. This government has come and completely dismantled the whole process. So we need to go from getting the IMF program sorted out and committed. It will also show that we are demonstrating fiscal and financial discipline. Then we need to go in the short term, into debt renegotiation. The government has started it because they are unable to pay the debt, right? And that will take some time. We have to negotiate our way in that, and it can be done. Then we have to get bridging finance. As I said, to get the people off the street to go home, bridging finance is needed. There are many poor people in this country, daily wage earners. When we go through these reforms, they're going to find it very difficult. So we need a social welfare program. Unlike 30 years ago, the World Bank, the IMF, everybody is sensitive to that they need to be protected. And even today, I was having discussions with people in government of how we should go about that social welfare program. We need bridging finance because we had to pay off, people who give us the coal, the petrol, all the urgent supplies that are coming. Friendly countries, the IMF, the World Bank and all could be instrumental in that. And then we had the state banks, right? We need to protect them. And it's very important that we don't let this economic crisis convert into a banking crisis. So we should recapitalize the state banks. These are things we should do immediately. Come to an agreement with the IMF, restructure our debt, get bridging finance, have a social protection for the poor, and recapitalize basically our state banks. This will be the immediate economic steps. And then there are long-term reforms that we need to do.
Do you want to elaborate on it?
Sure. So one of the long-term reforms that we will have to do is we have lots of state-owned enterprises. Now, if the state-owned enterprise is providing a service or a product which is strategically important, maybe it's like water, right, which is very, very important, right? Like that, we identify what we think are the strategic services that are needed. Then the government having ownership in that, right, is justifiable. But there are lots of other state-owned enterprises, right, which the government has been trying to do, but they don't have a strategic reason to do it. If they are making profits, then that's great, but lots of them are making losses. When you make losses, it's a taxpayer who is paying it. It's that poor lady that goes to the puller or goes to the shop, and she has to buy her daily needs for her family. And she's on a very limited income. She has 2 kids. She wants to make sure that the kids are not malnourished. She has to pay for their transport to school. And she has to buy the basic essentials for their education. She's completely unable to, really unable to do that. So we can't take that money which needs to go into education and education of the poor and then put it into fancy government projects, state-owned enterprises. We can't do that. You take Sri Lankan Airlines, for example. I'm all for having an airline if it can be run profitably, if the state doesn't have to put taxpayers' money, right? Because it's a question of priorities. Do we educate our children? Do we educate the children of the less fortunate? Or do we run some of these state-owned enterprises? There are hundreds and hundreds of state-owned enterprises. In COPE, we are looking at it now. And we are looking at this in a joint government and opposition forum and saying, let's make collective decisions for the betterment of the country. And therefore, we need to reform our state-owned enterprises. We have to look at the public service in this country, right? Alanki, I would like to ask you, or I would like to ask your parents, right? If they go to the municipality, are they getting the services that they want at the speed that they want without making extra payments? I would like to know, if you go to another government department, it may be the UDA, it may be the electricity board, it may be, several, permits that are given, for mining there are permits given, for transporting wood, for the carpentry industry there are permits that are given. And I hear the cry of these people. I hear this often in Moratuwa by very, very small and medium scale carpenters, who are operating. And then when you hear about the corruption in this country, you called about a change of system right at the beginning. Corruption is one thing that has to go. That's a part of the change of the system that we need. And when you hear the public sector needs to be reformed, the public want an efficient service. They want it quickly.
Absolutely.
Right? And people are agreed on this. So you need public sector reform. Then, right, then there are lots of other things that you have reformed. Take education, for example, right? Every child in this country needs a quality education and a quality higher education. And what I mean by quality higher education is it can be professional, university, technical, mechanical, information technology, or some kind of skill that they get. It doesn't mean everybody going to university, because different people have different skills. We're a small population, 22 million people. 2 cities in India have 22 million people. 2 cities in China have 22 million people. What is Sri Lanka's really comparative advantage? One is our location. We are in the east-west shipping route. We are the gateway to the Indian subcontinent, which is probably the largest populated subcontinent in the world. That's our market. We are the gateway. So being an island, the way we are situated is a unique, competitive selling proposition. That's one. The second unique selling proposition is our population. That is why every child needs a higher education. So we need to reform our education policy, right? So how do we reform it? We talked about free education. C.W.W. Kannangara, we talk about him, and I really honor him, right? And what he meant by it and what we are doing today is quite different. He meant a quality education for everybody. He wanted quality schools in this country, and we haven't really achieved it. 150,000 or more students at the last A-levels, right, qualified to go to university. How many would we take this year? Maybe 35,000 students. And then they say only state education. My heavens, to get to the 150,000, we will take decades and decades and decades. No, reform the system. The supplier doesn't matter. Alanki, right? When you have kids, whether your kids get the education, whether it's Korean or Russian, American or European or Indian, Chinese or Sri Lankan won't matter. What really matters is whether they're educated or not. So when we reform the system, we will allow the suppliers to come in. We will regulate the quality. That should be the role of government, not stopping suppliers coming. We should allow the private sector to come in and provide educational services. We should allow the non-governmental, non-profit sector to come in. Most of the famous universities in the world, the top universities in the world, are non-government and non-profit. There is no profit and profit distribution. It may be fee levying. The money is taken, quality education is given, and what do if they make a profit? They put the money back into the same institution so that others could be given scholarships and more people could come in and receive scholarships. That's the way the system works. That's what I mean by reform. What I mean by reform is it's a question of giving every child, every student, creating an opportunity. That's the way Sri Lanka will go forward. There are many other things, but these are some of the urgent reforms that we need to get into.
Those are indeed some meaningful suggestions. Moving on to the next question. People are saying these days that all 225 parliamentarians should go home. How does this make you feel, and what are your views on this?
I would like to tell everybody who sees Alanki talking with Eran, if anybody wants to take my seat in parliament, they're most welcome to do so. I think we need to be careful when we say this. We need a democratic system.
Right.
So we need parliament. We need the 225. But it's a valid question. Whom are we actually sending to parliament? I will say all those people out there, come into a political party, ask people for a vote and come into parliament. If you are not happy with the existing political parties, form a party, form a political party through a democratic vote, because you need to have the franchise of the people. The people are sovereign. Come into parliament and change the system. We need to protect the rule of law and we need to protect democracy. But I agree that there is a big question mark about the quality of the person coming, and that must be changed. And everybody is responsible for that, and we must change that. I made a conscious decision after being in the private sector for 25 years, right, as a vice president in an international bank, and then starting a new commercial bank in Sri Lanka, and then becoming its group CEO, right, to leave it when I had 10 more years. And I thought, I must, rather than stay out and be critical of it, I must go in and trying to change the system. I am so happy when I see, right, people on the golf-face and people elsewhere who want to make a change to the system. I'm so happy about it. But I also want to tell those young people and those young professionals, to change the system, some of you, everybody is not called to do politics, some of you need to get into political parties or form political parties. Protect the democratic system, protect the rule of law, come in. Because if some of you are here, there's a critical mass of people, not just 1 or 2 or 3 people in parliament. And we can change this system for the future generations so that our children will not migrate, leave their parents behind here, but they will all live in this country.
Right. Moving on to the final question. It's nothing to do with you, but I'd like to know your views. Kota Go Gama is a movement like no other. There are people from all walks of life coming together, demanding that the president resigns and demanding that democracy prevails. Do you see this happening?
I'm an optimist. And the people on the street are certainly giving a message. They want to change. And they want a radical change.
Right.
They don't want family rule in this country. And this is not just about the Rajapaksas. If you look at parliament, there are many families. Mother was there, father was there, a husband came or the wife came in, the son or the daughter came in, nephew or the niece or the cousin came in. And that has been there. That's not just Sri Lankan, but that's a bit of an Asian phenomenon. But in Sri Lanka, it has reached an unbelievable state. One family, 5 members sit in the Sri Lankan cabinet. 5 members sit in it. Certainly, that's not good for the country. In one family, 7 members, when you take cabinet ministers and non-cabinet ministers. 70% of the budget of the country was controlled, right, by that family in terms of them sitting, in those positions. So that must change. That is why people have got fed up and they have said, Gota, go home, right? That is why that cry has come. And I think everybody needs to be sensitive to it. The family needs to be sensitive to it. Every member of parliament representing the people, we have to be sensitive to it. But I don't think we need to focus this just on an individual. We should change the system. We have proposed and we have brought that proposal into parliament, an amendment, which basically says abolish the executive presidency. We have put all the checks and balances there, right? And there's a dignified way in which it can then be handled. And once that is done, right, the immediate requirement is to help the people on the streets. And there, I think political parties can come together, put their heads together and see how we could, over the next few months, immediately cooperate in solving the urgent needs. And then, after that, we could call for an election after a period of time. And then the people can give a new mandate to the people they think who have a plan and also who have the ability in actually taking this country forward.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Wickremeratne. I know Sri Lanka is facing a crisis and not many politicians are willing to come forward and talk about it. Sri Lanka faces many troubles. We, the people, hope and pray that our leaders would do everything in their power to resolve the current crisis. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for watching. I will be back with a new episode soon. Until then, stay safe and take care.